Okay, in this section, I'm going to take a bit of a time out and back things up a bit and discuss a little bit about the process of design. In this particular case, my process. And as if you've been following up to this point, you noticed that I've been doing a lot of talking, but at the same time, uh, there's things going on in my head while I'm doing this stuff that you're probably not aware of as to progressive changes that I'm making. As you've seen, I've just more or less just been throwing stuff without any due care and consideration as to the requirements necessary to get a design like this into a game engine like Urban Terror. And that's because the nature of the edit environment that we're in uh, inspires change over time with the ability to defer problems until they become necessary to deal with. Meaning, things like making sure that, our maps are power to, that kind of thing. These are problems that we could just sort of forego for now in favor of just shooting from the hip and making changes intuitively. Now, the original concept, going back to the beginning, was inspired by seeing a design layout that I looked at that was, in my impression, was just, a cookie cutter layout. Now, I wasn't really considering what that layout design represented. Did it represent a city block, or was this actually an internal environment? So, looking at it from my perspective, I just simply say, this could be an interior space. This interior space could be a kill room, meaning the training room that SWAT and Navy SEALs train in. So, although the original concept would have been a city block, it obviously can be redefined as an environment to fit within that concept. The other part of the concept wasn't to demonstrate how to make a usable map or a map that would be popular. It was simply a catalyst to demonstrate tool usage, how you could use an application like 3ds Max in combination with an application like Radiant, which then will produce a usable map in Urban Terror. So being a more of a artist slash 3D graphic artist, a lot of what I know about tool usage uh, does simply allows me to kind of retarget or redefine what would be an environment 3D environmental space into a real-time engine that has a interactive subcomponent to it where people can run around a space, a three-dimensional space with a digital gun, so to speak, and do combat. So to me, that's just more of an extension of my art form into a different media. So if we're talking about process, this is the direction and the design path that I'm more or less naturally gravitate to, and not necessarily just being a purpose of design. Okay, so to talk a little bit further here, as you've noticed, I've just more or less been just going straight at it. I have not done anything in the consideration as far as uh, the actual game requirements goes. In this case, something like, for example, um, maintaining power to texture images. As you notice, I've just been throwing textures on this, very high detailed textures, some cases 2, maybe even at some point 4K size images, and I'm just moving around finding the kind of detail I want out of it without any consideration whatsoever as to these requirements. This is because I already know at the beginning that these are the kind of issues I can defer to another point when they need to be they're required to be handled. So uh, obviously we put a lot of high detail into the wall section here, uh, and in total we're looking at an application of about maybe 40-50 megabytes worth of texturing space being occupied onto wall surfaces that don't really require that amount of texture detail. It's needless to say, it's abusive. But I do know that I can defer this, and in the next section, going to kind of jump ahead to demonstrate that of how we can remap our textures so they do conform to the Power 2 requirements. And by demonstrating that, um, instead of well, what I think I see is usually is the process of finding the fit to finish texture image that will fit that one little square spot just perfectly, and it's not all blurry and so forth. Also, I hope to present at least some ideas as to how you could use a application like 3ds Max. Remember, we're talking about any kind of 3D application that allow you to edit on the fly intuitively. Doesn't present any too much obstacles as to, say, weeding out your design, and just simply use it to, uh, you know, do your edits first, focus on that first, and then defer. And in this case, I can demonstrate a whole bunch of other things once we move into that area. Now, as I believe I mentioned before, a lot of design, figuring out the design is as a work in progress as I progress through it. So in this case, while I'm working on the wall here, if you were to say, for example, come up behind me and say, okay, stop what you're doing and tell me what you're thinking at this very moment. So I'm saying these words and demonstrating how you can manipulate that, but at the same time, I'm also thinking ahead about how these various different components and elements that I'm adding can be enhanced by adding other elements to that surf to this particular type of surface here. So as I'm working on this, for example, I'm looking at the edge work here. I'm not really too overly pleased about how this is shaping up because it has that abrupt type of connection. It just intersects and connects and shoots off in a different direction, and it doesn't show any type of connectivity between one panel and another. So going back, so realizing that the concept here is this is going to be a kill room, which is basically a fabricated room. While I'm doing this, I'm thinking about, maybe I'll put a caps on each of the corner ends that kind of looks like um, a U channel that is used to screw these panels together on the interior so that somebody later on, if they want to take this whole room and put it somewhere else, they just undo the screws, pack everything up flat and off they go. Then they can go into a different area. I'm also was thinking about, you know, as I believe I also mentioned it, I do a lot of my design idea concepts. I don't really pre-plan them, but what I do as part of the progression is think about, you know, what I want to do with have a completed design. And part of that, as I probably mentioned back a bit without rewinding, was the idea that it was an open top type of area where you could be up top here, look down, and see people running around. The only problem is then you got to do a skybox in behind it, and then once you put a skybox in behind it, then when you start getting out like this, then you have this kind of floaty effect. So what I'm thinking is this is going to be a room inside a building, like a big warehouse. So up, so if you're running around in here and you look up, you'll see the rafters, you'll see the roof, You'll have an impression that this is a room inside a room. Above, I'm thinking about putting like catwalks and lighting fixtures and so forth that that spills light down into this area here, spotlights or whatever, which then changes my idea of how I want to light map this area here. There are many options, and then the option that I'm going to go with after thinking about it is I'm going to do a full render to texture um, lighting solution, meaning that the actual lighting itself is baked into the texture. Hopefully, I'll be able to demonstrate that in the next episode, and that favors the idea of painting with lights, which is something we've been kind of promoting. And painting with lights in a basic sense is like how we're looking right now. Boom, like this. And we're looking at this as a three-dimensional rendered image on a two-dimensional plane. And as you can already see, because I have realistic turned on, it's creating artificial shadows already to give us a kind of a sense within uh, the edit port here in the viewport of how this might look once a true lighting rigging is set up. So if I actually move this around, you can see that the shadows change because the global illumination is at a fixed point. Um, the shadow in itself is not very impressive. It's more of a it's not doing a ray trace shadow. It's doing a shadow map, which is basically just looks for an object and then it traces black in behind it. So it's not really a true shading type effect. So another thing that I decide to do design-wise, for example, if I just sort of hide these out of the way, you can see that because of the cookie cutter approach that I did initially took with particularly the floor, it's kind of knocked out these holes in the floor that what it does is it kind of binds us to this overall floor design. You know, if we decide that we don't like, for example, um, if we don't like this here, we want to actually rotate that around a little bit, like like so. Well, it's not really going to fit that way, but you get the idea. If we wanted to say make some changes to the layout, you know, even if we wanted to say, for example, we just didn't want to do this one room. Say we wanted to do multiple rooms uh, based on this singular overall design. We really can't do it because obviously we got a hole in the floor that won't allow for it. So let's deal with that right now. Um, by bringing up the material editor, I'm going to snag that off just to kind of quickly demonstrate how we can make intuitive time changes just because we don't like it. So um, let's move this off. Oh well, let's leave it there. We're going to use a create standard plain object, and then we're going to have auto grid turned on, so we snap to this surface area here. Then I'm going to pull this out over here, and then just so it's outside of it, I'm going to convert that over to an editable poly, and then uh, I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to turn this to 0, 0, and then get as much coverage as I can. Do this at the parametric stage or level, if you want to call it. Procedurally create the plane that I want, and kind of zero this out. If you right click on down here, it's going to zero this out to whatever floor we want. I don't want that to be popped up because I want it to overlay the old floor, and bring that out far enough. And if I isolate it, And I'm going to up the iterations actually back to 6 and 6. As I explained, if we're going to light map this also uh, in Radiant, or when we compile it, if we don't have enough subsections, then the light mapper will create black spots onto this here. Okay, then with that done, I'm just going to throw, boom, that texture onto it, unisolate it, hide selection for now, grab the old floor. You can see how it's all been kind of cut out and cut up. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to do an unhide all, and there's my floor back again. You know, I want to tighten that up a bit. Yeah, let it overhang. You know, we want it to overhang the outer edge, but not too much. Oops. There we go. Righto. Okay, so we're back to where we were almost at the beginning there. But now, if we take our little dividers here, if you want to call it that, and we'll hide that selection, and we have a nice, clean, flat surface area with our walls and so forth plopped on top of it. And we can call, you know, we can then change things around a little bit more easier, as well as part of the progressive design. You know, in other words, let's start by doing something, and then as we move along, we start making changes in our design based on the materialization of this space. You know, it it's like working in stone. You chip away the rock, and then of course, there's you're presented with a result kind of idea. Um, Thinking ahead again, once again, since I am going to use the render to texture technique to introduce my lighting solution directly into the texture, this means I'm going to have to UV map out everything to separate planar mapping. But then that allows me, once I have that completed, to take advantage of the a feature in 3ds Max called a viewport canvas, which means we can just take this, map it to its own texture image, and then we can activate the viewport canvas, and then we can literally paint onto three-dimensional surfaces. So, for example, here in this connectivity between the floor and this wall here, it's an abrupt. It doesn't have uh, a connecting element to it. Now, normally what you could do is you could say cut this an edge across here, create a tile element in here, so that we have what I could like to call a 1-2-2-1 connectivity effect, meaning we have a texture here which is 1, texture here is 2, we have this texture here is 2, and then we have this texture here which is 1. So that allows for a cascade type of effect between one element, connecting element, and another. It just doesn't look like bang in there and it's done. Now another way to create a connectivity between this example, this sill plate here, a kicker if you want to call it, and the floor itself, is we can then use the viewpoint the viewport canvas to paint in um, a kind of dirt buildup. You know, dirt's been pushed into this, which in itself creates a connectivity between the two of them. Also, with a viewport brush paint, we can paint in, say, start painting over top of this, um, you know, ragged carpet with patches and you know, dirt and grime right over top of this surface, and we can paint right into the wall surface itself. So if, say, for example, we want to do a mud or a blood splatter, we can select the brush, and if we go boink right here, then that splat will go up and down against the wall. Okay, so I think that's more or less kind of an update as to where we were, where we're going as part of a progression, and that part of that progression means in a 3D application means that we can defer a lot of the things that we feel that are going to be problematic, that are going to be an issue, being able to take what you've seen, what I've done up to this point, that ultimately meets the requirements of what it takes to get this into an engine and be and run efficiently.